Hi everyone, my name is Hannah, this is Pepper and Pine, and I have a tutorial to share with you today. We are making berried vermicelli, and this recipe is from the book called Arabesque, A Taste of Morocco, Turkey, and Lebanon by Claudia Roden. Now we have this book as part of our Silk Road unit, and part of our homeschool main lesson blocks and unit studies is to explore the food of the region, and we love to get into the kitchen and cook up recipes from those regions, especially historical recipes. So today we're going to make berried vermicelli. This is a Moroccan recipe, and it feeds a whole lot of people, and we're going to start out with boiling 2 chickens. Now I am altering the recipe just a little bit, and these chickens happen to be really big, so I ended up not using all of the meat from the chicken, and this feeds about 12 people. There was so much food. We're a family of 6. We had tons of leftovers. Now the recipe calls for boiling the chicken in very little water and adding onions and other spices to it as you boil the chicken until it is soft enough that the chicken just falls off the bone. Now, when I did this the first time, I found that the bones started to mix with the chicken and the onions, and I wasn't able to salvage a lot of those things except for the chicken pieces. And so I decided to boil this separately and then boil the onions and spices after the meat was off the bone. I don't think the flavor is as rich when you do it this way. I think you get a richer, deeper flavor when you follow the recipe. So I just wanted to offer both alternatives to see which one would work for you. But if you did decide to do it the way that I'm doing it here, where you boil the chicken first and take it off the bone, then add all the other spices, I would recommend that you add maybe 1.5 to 2.5 times the spices in order to really develop those flavors. So this chicken is really hot, so you want to use tongs or wait till it cools in order to get the chicken off the bone. And now we can transfer some of that chicken broth back to our pot along with the onions and the other spices that we're going to need for this part of the recipe. So it calls for 4 large onions, and my onions were not that large, so I ended up using about 6 small to medium onions. So we're just going to remove the skin, and I'm going to dice this up in fairly large pieces. We want to boil this down quite a bit, and so you can even chop this more roughly if you want. By the time the recipe is done, these onions are so soft and kind of mixed in with the chicken that you can't barely tell that they're even there, although they do impart an amazing flavor. So we're going to transfer all of these onions into that boiling chicken broth, as well as the spices that are going to go along with it. This part does take a little while to get them all soft, and so you are taking more time to do the recipe than if you did boil those onions with the chicken. We're going to have some flat leaf parsley as well as cilantro for this recipe, and the recipe calls for 1/2 cup, but because I had so much chicken on those 2 chickens, I think it probably would have been better if we used 1 cup of parsley, or if you do use 1/2 cup, really squeeze it down and try to fill in as much as you can into that half cup. I'm only roughly chopping this up because it's going to get cooked up a little bit. I want to be able to still see these beautiful green leaves, but you can chop them up more finely if you'd like. I do recommend using the fresh over the dried herbs. We also are going to be using some fresh ginger and fresh garlic. I'm just going to remove the skin. You can also use a peeler to do this, and in some cases, I think if you wash this really well with a scrub brush, you can stick this all into a little blender and grind it up and make your own ginger paste, which actually is a really good alternative because some of these pieces were still not soft enough once I was done cooking, and you can bite into some ginger, which some people like, but some people may not like. I'm also going to use about 1/2 teaspoon of saffron. My little 1/4 teaspoon is what fits into my jar, so I'm going to take 2 1/4 teaspoons of the saffron pieces. This is not ground saffron. And we're also going to use 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, and this is where you could easily add 1 or even 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. The cinnamon was so mild you could barely taste it in the end, which is fine. This is a different kind of recipe that includes more sweet with the savory, and if that's not what you're really into, then you could definitely reduce the cinnamon, but 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, you're not going to be able to taste it, but you will smell it, and it is amazing. So we're going to let that simmer for about 20 to 30 minutes. And in the meantime, we're going to take all of those chicken pieces that are now cool enough to touch, and we're going to just chop them up into just bite-sized pieces. Whenever I boil my chicken, it always ends up looking this way. However, the recipe in the book shows the chicken pieces a bit more cubed, as though they were just maybe a chicken breast or chicken thigh that were just cut up. I'm putting 3 cups of vermicelli pasta, egg pasta, into about 2 cups of chicken broth, and that way it just absorbs some of that flavor of the chicken broth. I'm also adding some orange blossom water to the chicken, and this also imparts this beautiful flavor and smell. And again, I think you could probably put more into your recipe than what the recipe calls for. And I think this is just because my chickens were so big. Now you could boil your vermicelli and drain it, but I decided to let it just simmer in that chicken broth. And then to the chicken, I'm adding a tablespoon of honey. So if you've never had a sweet element to your savory dishes, I do encourage you to try it. It's a really different experience. It feels like you're eating dinner and dessert at the same time. So I've added most of that chicken back into that chicken broth, and you could probably still add more chicken broth to that if you want it to be a little bit more saucy. And then at the very end, I'm going to add our fresh herbs and mix it all in. And now it's time to plate our berried vermicelli. Now, the first time I did this, I did bury the chicken in the vermicelli, but this time around, I decided to put the vermicelli first onto our platter and then put the chicken on top. And I really like the way that this looks. It was a little bit easier to serve and a little bit easier actually to plate. The last thing you want to do is saute or brown your almonds, and I'm just using the sliced almonds that are pre-sliced that you can get at the grocery store. The recipe does call for blanched almonds, and I actually like the slivered almonds a little bit better than the sliced ones. I like the way the crunch is and how they brown when you add oil to them. So now we're just going to let these almonds brown completely. It's really easy to burn them, so you have to keep an eye on them, but you also need the oil to be hot enough. I did add a sprinkle of cinnamon and sugar before I topped it off with the almonds. This dish is such a beautiful showpiece. I highly encourage you to make it once, but make sure you have guests over because it feeds a lot of people. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more of our cooking tutorials, you can tap on the screen right now. If you want to see some of the other projects in our Silk Road unit, you can tap on the screen right now. That link is also down in the description box below. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video. And if you'd like to see how our homeschool is progressing on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.